So we're live, I think.
All right.
Say hi to some camera, everyone. I don't know which one. This is our first conversation with the composer Patrick Cassidy. We are here with members of Laude, who recorded his The Mass album that has been released in 2 singles so far, one last week and one today. And just so you know who we're talking to, would you all introduce yourself, starting, I'm David Harris, the Music and Arts Director.
I'm Laurel Irene, a section leader in Laude and also David's life partner.
I'm Molly Pease, also a section leader in Laude.
I am Patrick Cassidy, the composer of The Mass.
I'm James Hayden, also a section leader of Laude.
And I'm Fahed Siada, I'm the assistant director for Laude.
We're so glad you're all here. Thank you for taking this time out of your Monday, and thank you all who are watching at home, at your lunch break, etc. Very excited to have this conversation and to dig into what got us to this point. And to begin with, I'd like you to roll back into February, if you can. There we were, and I think if I read the room correctly in mid-February, no one had the stomach for doing anything big, if I remember that moment. And yet we got on a Zoom with Patrick and we said, let's do this big thing, but don't think about it too big. Just let it be a week-to-week moment. And here we are on Friday, 3 days ago, our first single hit #1 on the Apple Music chart. And how do you get from mid-February to that experience? I actually didn't believe that it was even a thing. I was like, what? That can't be anything. And I looked up, I was like, oh, it actually is a thing. But my brain wasn't ready for that difference, I think. So I don't know, each of you, how do you get from mid-February to #1 on the Apple Music charts to right now?
I think it's something that I talk with composers about a lot, which is if you set out to do a really big project, I'm going to write an opera or an oratorio or a mass, it never gets done, but it's like just one step. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, today I will record one piece. Next week I'll record another piece, and if you it's just that one step at a time. I didn't have stomach, as you were saying, for like anything big, but I had the stomach to record one piece. And it's just like made up of a bunch of those small steps, I think.
And Fahed, you're unique. You said you say it to composers a lot. Tell us more about why that matters.
How do you mean, like in terms of?
Like, who are you in relationship to other composers that they would care about your opinion?
I'm a composer myself, right? And it's just like, in being in a community of composers, we always talk about, like Molly and I, for instance, like we both talk about as composers, like the struggles that we face with being overwhelmed by giant projects, And I mean, Patrick, maybe you felt this way about this piece. I don't know if you were like, yep, this is gonna be it. This is gonna be this like epic piece. Or if you're like, oh, today, I'm just gonna worry about the unused day. Today I'm gonna,
I think for me, it was a project I had thought about for many years. And I had even discussed this mass with my father when he was alive. And, my father passed away in 98. So I think with the mass, I think it is something a composer should probably tackle when they're a bit more mature and able for something like that. And I was determined that it would get my very best. So I spent a lot of time at it. I mean, it took me about a year to write the mass. And if there was any movement I was unhappy with, I discarded it and started afresh, So I tried to, there's a term in rock and roll, all killer, no filler. So I tried to do that with the mass.
I wish more people would listen to that advice.
Yeah.
And Patrick, did you, to the question asked initially, did you feel, or how did you feel as we started the process of recording it? You were here with Christoph, but you didn't get to see us. Like, what was that like for you?
Well, I think I had a very good sense of the choir, from meeting you and Christoph. I remember you came to my house and we sat outside and we had a cup of tea and a sandwich, socially distant at the time. And in any case, when I heard the first piece sung by the choir, which was Sanctus, what would that have been around March, would it, I suppose?
February 21st was when that first service had the Sanctus in it.
Yeah, well, you know, when I heard that, I knew I was dealing with something special, you know, a special group of performers. And, you know, from that point onwards, I felt that Laude, you, David, Christoph, you know, were my soulmates in this project, very much. And I'm so happy it has found a home here in First Church.
Because you had heard us do other virtual recordings, right? You'd heard the Dona Nobis Pacem we did.
Yes, David had sent me that, you know, before we did the Sanctus. But you know what? I think on my piece you were getting better all the time at doing the virtual recording.
Yeah.
And you know, that piece was by was it Benjamin Britten?
Vaughan Williams.
Vaughan Williams, who I like, but I hadn't known that piece, you know, that well. So, but I think as the process went on, I think Laude got used to this process, and by the time I became involved, you guys were really up and running, and you know, you'd figured this out, and that was great. And you know, every piece is recorded beautifully.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Vaughan Williams Dona Nobis Pacem, which was the first major work we recorded during quarantine at a very different time when we had a different energy, and we had been looking forward to doing that live, and then we decided we would tackle it and recorded it in a very similar way, one a week, but there were only 6 movements there, and there were 16 here. So, and it was later in.
Well, because you're bringing up this timeline of February 2021 to now, but the choral pandemic journey started, you know, 12 months before that. So yeah, we'd already been doing this virtual choir. I mean, really, yeah, this virtual choir marathon this group went through, because we were doing about 4 pieces a week from like the very first week we went into
March
lockdown.
17th.
Yeah, and we didn't skip anything.
Yeah, you said 300 total?
About I
About
think
300 total virtual
That's incredible.
performances.
And that's all us in our bedrooms or offices or closets by ourselves for
You know,
hours on end.
I wouldn't have thought it was, sorry for interrupting, I wouldn't have thought it was possible to get that ensemble sound by everybody doing it separately. I just, intuitively, I wouldn't have thought it was possible. It's incredible, really.
And I think most of the choral world is still in that place. It's really difficult, and we just happen to have a group of recording artists who had the equipment and had the gumption, and we did enough of it, and in a way we were at a very sweet spot 1 year in. We were just also fatigued as we could be, just really emotionally done with that process.
Yeah.
And I remember James, in particular, like your journey of learning to record virtual choirs. You know, like some of us had done some editing and things like that beforehand, but I remember like the first ones that you did, like you were just, if I couldn't get it all in one take.
Oh yeah, I was brand new to the whole thing, to having a microphone in my closet, and I built my own computer because none of my other computers could handle the like what Pro Tools needed to run is what I was using, and so it was a true babe in the woods kind of moment, figuring out how to make it work, and then the trust that's required of all of the singers to dig into the music and to kind of form a cohesive sound separate from everybody else, and to trust each other and the engineering on the back end in order to really get a cohesive sound was a truly remarkable thing to observe.
Well, that's, yeah, I would say that trust for sure. Because I think we've all done other virtual choir projects outside of this group. And for me, like, because we live together, you know, I turn my track over and I'm like, give me that good reverb. Like, you tune my notes up. Like,
It really is. You'd walk out of the recording and say, you want to check this spot and this spot and this spot, you want to merge the, you know, and would give me notes. And that was not uncommon for everyone. There was a real trust that developed, that we knew it would make it. And over the time that I recorded, and I was the one who was doing the mixing first out, or Molly, we both did that. But I would, I would do this myself before I would send it to Molly if she was mixing. But you know, I knew that I could take a woofy note and make it work. So if by the time we got to this project, I knew if it wasn't this, that, or the other. It's very interesting because I personally, preparing this piece, spent more time with every line, and I don't know if that's true for the rest of you, but from an emotional standpoint, it was like the piece called me into it, and I felt like I needed, for me, to just do it one more time. And maybe it was because I was creating more extensive guide tracks for you all so that you could hear where the word stresses were and stuff. I don't know, but there was something that I just wanted to do it one more time, more than any other song that we did. I don't know if y'all had an experience like that.
Yeah, I had an experience where I was feeling pretty burnt out from both singing in my closet and also from editing. But the meditative sort of feeling of this piece and the long phrases really helped me kind of take a deep breath and just sit with it and let the feeling sort of marinate as I was recording. And I think that helped me get through it, because if it were a more like up-tempo, energetic piece, it would have been harder at that time, I think.
Does anybody else resonate with that thought?
Well, yeah, I think so many of the pieces that we were doing, like I would re-record sections when the notes and rhythms weren't tight. In this piece, because of the pace of it, I wasn't so concerned with the notes and rhythms. They were pretty accessible to me. I could take my time, and it was more about, like that meditative quality Molly's talking about, getting to sit with the line and really enjoy the musicality of it and ask myself, is my interpretation of this line, right? The notes and rhythms were there from the first take, but was the depth of phrasing and feeling and understanding, was that there? And that's, it was just a completely different focus. And it came at just the right time, as you were saying, after it took a good 10 or 11 months to figure out how to really, like all the tips and tricks that we needed to do the recording stuff. It was only then that we were like, oh yeah, this is how we do it. And then we were ready for a big project. Even the Vaughan Williams was like, I think it was, who was it? Somebody who said something like, oh, you can, if someone's recorded before you, you can use them as a guide to blend with. And I was like, why did this take me 8 months?
Yeah.
So by that time, by the time we'd hit it, like we knew exactly the method for how to do this. And the technicalities weren't the thing that were the focus. It was the music. And that was a really nice aspect of the project.
And this brings up several questions. I'm going to go in this order. First, tailing off of that to James, I'm going to ask you to answer for Elizabeth, your new fiance. Congratulations, James.
Congratulations.
Yep, just got engaged. You want to tell us a quick story about Hawaii?
Hawaii was amazing, and she didn't necessarily expect me to propose because she said I was too calm, cool, and collected. I was too relaxed with, maybe we go snorkeling today, maybe we go snorkeling tomorrow. But we had one fancy dinner where I knew we'd be dressed up, we wouldn't have beach hair and sunburned face, and we would look good for photos, and that was the plan.
That was the moment.
All
right.
Well,
caught her by surprise, so
right,
and she said yes.
Okay.
That's the best part.
Finish the story.
You've announced it live, so
Yeah.
Everybody knows.
But Elizabeth was the soloist on that first track, Songtus, which is the one that topped the charts this week. And it was our first entry into the work. And with each of the soloists, and all of you except for James, there wasn't a bass solo. I did reprimand Patrick for that. But each of you had a solo in this work as well, and partially because that's what we do in Laude. We spread the soloists around because we have such amazing soloists. And each person brings their own energy, their own emotion to the piece. Well, Elizabeth, with each of you, I got a conversation, because we didn't get together, we didn't rehearse the piece, we just talked about it. And I remember saying to Elizabeth, I said, it's a beautiful work, I love Patrick. This piece could be a big deal, so sink into it like you're doing an audition for the person you've always wanted to sing for in your life. I don't know that made a difference to her, but what she brought, she set the bar for this piece for us, in my opinion, in that solo. And I'm just curious, when you watched her do it, when you were around her, do you remember anything from that moment? And it's sinking way back.
Yeah, I mean, flashback to February, but I remember her commitment to the learning process, to tackling especially some of these solos are real endurance pieces, where there's really no spot in the line to sneak a breath or to disrupt this beautiful phrase that Patrick has crafted. And so finding a way to maintain your poise and your intention and your tone while also having it be free and flexible and communicative. I really remember her digging into that and committing to making that a part of the reality of her solo. I was thrilled to hear it from the other room. Like, you're doing great, but of course you can't call out when you're on the tape. So.
But she's such a pro. I mean, I think she brings that to everything too. She really, I don't know. I've never seen her not do that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I just remember hearing it when I first put it in the mix and thinking, okay, now we've got a launch pad. Finally, it's making sense now, and I think that was my response. I know, Patrick, after you heard the first recording, you were always so generous with the whole process of sending back an affirmative text, but that particular moment, you want to talk about your response to that?
Well, I have to say that, you know, I love Elizabeth's voice, and congratulations. You're going to have very musical children, I think. She sings it beautifully, and there's something, she brings a spirituality to the piece that I never thought even existed. You know, she just brought it to a new level. And I think that is true for so many of the solo singers with Laude. It's incredible that such a beautiful ensemble sound, but then each member is actually a brilliant soloist as well. Astonishing standard. You know, and it's a pleasure just working with people like you, I have to say that.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, Patrick, a little more for you. You know, you've heard us talking about our experience. This piece is unique in the choral repertoire. The fastest movement is quarter note equals 46, and the slowest is quarter note equals 29. I don't know that I've ever seen quarter note equals 29, maybe in an Arvo pair piece, but it's fairly unique. You've heard us talking about the long styled phrases and the emotion of just being with that, you know, kind of pristine beauty. Can you say more about why you wanted to torture singers? No, I'm kidding. No, but about what about the, you know, you're a noted film composer, you're clearly Irish if everybody's been listening to your accent. What about those parts of your professional and personal life and your relationship to this work brought you to this particular kind of setting?
I've been told that the Mass is quite visual, and I suppose that comes from my experience working as a film composer. Although I didn't intend to do that when I wrote it, I suppose it just happened. And the Irishness is just something that's natural for me. My first big work was a cantata in the Irish language, and I've continued specialising in pretty much dead languages since then, and I'm Latin. But I think particularly when I go into a minor key, I just can't escape the modes that I grew up with in Irish music. It's just inescapable, and it's just who I am, I suppose.
You mentioned minor, but we've talked a little bit about the modality that is baked into the Irish traditional music, and that Irish traditional music is really a melodic music first, and that, you know, in school we're taught modality has to do with Gregorian music because they used it in a specific way, but traditional Irish music today is still very modal, and it takes a listener some time to start to understand that. How does that sense of modality play into your use of melody in this piece?
But as I said to you, I think it's unintentional. I find it hard to escape from who I am when I write, and I don't deliberately try to write something that sounds Irish. Amazingly, Irish people don't find my music to be that Irish. I get much more of that comment from people here in America. And that's an odd thing, yeah.
Do they find Kerrygold to be very Irish?
Right.
Or is it just a standard?
This is just butter.
Yeah.
It's good
Have you
butter.
been to the Butter Museum in Cork?
Which museum?
The Butter Museum?
I haven't, but I love Irish butter, you know, even though it's very bad for you, I believe.
It's a funny little museum with plastic figurines of cows and empty butter churns and
Yeah, we had a good time.
a story of the butter revolution. So.
Well, the next time you're in Ireland, you must visit the Leprechaun Museum in Dublin.
Okay.
It actually exists.
All right.
Yeah.
Going there in
It's
a
very
few weeks.
small.
Yeah, oh, that's right, you're right.
I'm writing that down.
But so, say a little bit more about the film side, though, because I think listening to your film music, there is certainly some crossover, and there's a spirituality that is inherent in the piece, in the Mass, that connects to your film, the way you set up film scores in some way that I haven't been able to put into words. Maybe you can't either, but...
Well, again, it's completely unintentional, and I've been very lucky in some of the music film projects I've landed. I mean, the biggest piece I've done really since I've come to Los Angeles was the Vita Curmeum, which was written for the movie Hannibal, and it's a poem by the Italian poet Dante, whose 700th anniversary is this year, incidentally. So, and that piece, you know, Dante's poetry is spiritual. It's, you know, he's considered a Catholic philosopher, Christian philosopher, as well as a poet. And so, having the opportunity to write that, and also the movie Calvary, which tells the story of an Irish priest who's being persecuted by his parishioners, and a very, very, very profound movie. But I suppose those type of projects, I might have gotten them because of the type of music I write, possibly, I would think. And I've always been attracted to liturgical music. You know, I remember I was given an LP of Handel's Messiah when I was about maybe 8 years of age, and I played it till it was covered in scratches. And so, when I write music, I think I'm always attracted to that particular genre. And the Mass is a beautiful libretto, really beautiful libretto to write to, I think.
In what ways? What stands out to you?
It sounds to me like it's meant to be sung, not spoken.
That's lovely.
You know, Dave, your comparison with Arvo Pärt, I don't know why I haven't thought of that earlier. You know, there's, I don't know if any of the other performers have performed his stuff, but there's a similar experience I've had of the difference between listening to the music and performing it, right? You know, when I listen to it, I don't hear its tempo, right? You just hear sort of like textural and sonic and harmonic worlds, like your piece. In the act of performing, it's very different. That's when I start to realize that it's quarter note equals 29 or whatever, you know? The experience is completely different. It's that slow moving, finding that quiet, ecstatic nature in every note. But listening to it, it's just sort of this like wash of transportive sound. And I'm reminded of something that he once said about his own music, which is, you know, that the reason that he writes so slowly, and maybe you feel similarly, is because every single sound matters. And as you were saying, what did you say? All killer, no filler? You know, like no extraneous harmony, no extraneous note. Just and if you love every single moment, why not sit with it for a little bit, you know?
I think we're missing that we're certainly miss it when we consume things digitally and virtually. Like we were talking about how when you present something to an audience that they can stream, you don't actually get to control the space. You don't know what else they're listening to. You don't know when they come and go, where their attention is, versus in the room, you know, the lights are down, you're sitting, the lights are up, we're standing, we're all gonna be here for the full hour, whatever it is. And that durational element is key to what sound is, it's key to what music is, and I think we really really missed that when we didn't get our live performance experiences last year.
Which we will get a live performance of this in February, and if you're listening, you're invited to come and even sing if you like. Since we're talking live, well, before we get there, we'll come back to that. A question about, Fahed, you brought up Arvin Parrott, and you said you're a composer. Everyone in this room is a composer and has pieces on YouTube if you want to listen to them. And we all identify in different ways with that. Everyone in this room has a long track record of creating brand new music. And most of the time, we're finding stuff that is technically incredibly diverse and challenging and asking for various timbres and crazy rhythms and use of text and tempo and all of these things. And so we have a lot of different chops among us. Explore a little more what this piece challenged you with. Because Fahed, you mentioned the notes, the rhythms, they're all very accessible. In fact, I think this piece will enter the choral canon very quickly because of that. But it has some unique challenges that you don't run into until you lift the hood a little bit and start making sound. So what did y'all find challenging and also fulfilling because of those challenges?
For me, something that Fahed brought up reminded me of something he says often when we're rehearsing things, whether he's conducting or just being a singer, which is that it's important to look at the forest instead of just the individual trees. And that was challenging for me with this piece, especially being alone recording it. And even in the live situation in our rehearsals we've been having since we've been back, just remembering that we are one in a whole piece that's got this sonic world that Fahed was mentioning. We're not just our phrase, we're everybody in the room. And that has been a really interesting challenge, just to remind myself to listen to everything that's happening.
Yeah, Laurel was saying when we recorded virtually, we did our phrase. Like in the Credo and Sanctum Spiritum that you did yesterday, the choir had 2 phrases. So you did that, you had no idea what the piece sounded like. And it's...
No, I have to say, when Fahed directed that yesterday, it was even slower than my tempo.
You're welcome.
Give us a challenge, Patrick.
So, he's taking it to a new extreme. Yeah.
Other challenges that we didn't create for ourselves?
Something that I really enjoyed about exploring this piece was the sense of kind of expansion and contraction in it. I, off the top of my head, can't think of any other major works that have such a range of kind of vocal texture in them. There will be pieces that are dense and just 2-part tenor, 2-part bass, really sitting in the low part of the range. And then the next movement will expand up to 4-part soprano, alto, tenor, bass. And then the next one will add a soloist on top of that. And so over the course of this major work, to have this almost like breathing, this sense of contraction and then inspiration and then contraction again, I found it to be really interesting, especially in the context of our lives at that time, which had been so contracted from what they had been before, but we were starting to, as the vaccine rollout began to happen, we were starting to find these moments where we could expand and connect with other people again. So I think part of digging into this piece at that time for me was really seeing how life imitated art in that way, the moments of introspection and then the moments of reaching out to other people.
Nice.
Thank you for that, James. What did it feel like for you or any of you when you felt connected through the music you were making in isolation? What did that connection feel like? Does that question make sense?
I did a thing when I was recording that was very intentional to find that connection, which I would close my eyes and take a deep breath and imagine myself here, actually, on this chancel, because this space has been such a community-oriented space for me and experience, and there were definitely a lot of moments recording this work and also other works that we recorded I felt very alone. So that moment of taking the deep breath and picturing this space, which I was actually living very far away from at the time, was my way of finding that connection, and imagining all of us in this space together was really helpful.
I think that we got to hear the organ track when we recorded, because we didn't always get to have, every piece we did was different depending on what you got to have in your ear as you sang, but we always got to hear that Christoph had already done the organ part, and that instrument is so integral to this space and is so epic and big, and I think it helps, like you said in the very beginning, like, oh, we're doing something big in this time that isn't really isn't really made for a massive, big communal project. So, yeah, I think, the connection to the space and then to a major work, something we come back to week after week. Like we've talked about duration within each movement, but the way we recorded it was also endurance art, because we did one piece a week for how many pieces are
It
there?
was 14 weeks.
14 weeks. And that's a lot, especially because I think our other pattern was to have we always have so much variety in our music, variety in our skill sets. It's something that kind of keeps it fresh is, oh, well, I don't like the music this week, it'll be totally different next week. But to have this as our kind of constant check-in again and again.
And at a time when I think people didn't want to check in with themselves. I think, James, you kind of talked about that, that we had to reach into, and are still doing that, frankly, into what it means to be connected. When we had learned how to check out so easily with our Netflix or whatever. And to come back to, I'm reconnecting to this thing was actually quite challenging, I think.
Well, and as James was saying, like that was, when we started doing this project was just at the beginning of vaccine rollouts, and I was so out of practice being social, right? And the people that I used to connect with regularly, like, Molly was living in Sacramento, like y'all had just moved up to the wilderness or whatever, and like, so I wasn't, it was, even when I started having those opportunities, I was still like, that experience of recording was still very lonely. And for me, it was having the guide tracks, having individual voices. When you and Laurel would do like a guide track together, or Molly would have a guide track, I was like singing with my friends, and it was this weirdly satisfying but totally one-sided connection, and I'm just, like I'm having this experience of getting to make music with my friends and the people that I feel close to, and they're not getting the reciprocal energy from me. But that was like definitely one of those musical lifelines.
Or like one-sided, but then also delayed, because like you did get to hear everyone's voices together 4 days later on the Sunday. Like, and I would always peak early. I knew that David Saldani, who's running the stream, was doing videos, and I did some videos, and as soon as it was ready, I'm like, I want to see it, because it's like that's finishing the loop almost. Yeah. And then like the larger loop of, well, we are going to do it live one day, like there's
but, hearing
coming.
It, like, I think as a performer, the vast majority of concerts that I attend, I'm on this side of the stage, not in the audience, and so listening to it all together, like Laurel, just what you were saying earlier, like I'm getting up, I'm making myself a sandwich, like I'm not in it in the same way. At least when I was recording, I'm singing with somebody, so I have that experience. But then when we finally came back together, like I didn't really understand the piece until we had our first rehearsal in person together. I really didn't. And even as we were saying just like last week when we were doing the Credo and Spiritus Sanctum, which doesn't have a lot of choral parts. It's mostly solo, right? And then like the choir just shows up, but there's like a certain expectation. People are watching us while we stand there, and we're paying attention. We're in it the whole time, and it's just the holistic experience of the piece was listening to the soloist, listening to the organ, singing, all of that, and having to be 100% present. Partly because the cameras are on and people are watching, but that's just what happens in a live setting. Just like you were saying, it's completely different. I totally didn't understand the piece. I got a shadow of the piece when we were recording it.
Working here in the church with Christoph, it was a fun, educational, pleasurable experience because I would come in, I think it was usually around Wednesday, and Christoph would put down the organ track, which then would subsequently go to all of you to sing your individual part. And I don't think I've ever worked so closely with a musician in my entire life. We would spend a few hours going through the piece and considering the orchestration, and Christoph would say, okay, we want trombones and fanfare trumpets on bar 25. How about this? And, you know, such a master of the instrument. It was an incredible experience because even though I'd written for organ before, I didn't really understand the instrument until I worked with Christoph. Yeah. And that was a gift, being able to experience that for me.
I'm really looking
And
forward
for him too, I'm
to
sure.
having that conversation more deeply when he's in the room on November 8th, because I've wanted to know more about y'all's experience because I didn't get to be here, and just kind of how that went.
We had the church to ourselves and Casper recording, and that, just the three of us here. But then that would be on Wednesday, and then on Sunday I would get to hear the whole thing.
And I have to give a shout out to Mark Doughton, who mastered the whole project and just put his heart and soul into every week.
He did such an amazing job.
And
incredible.
We'll talk about this when we talk more with Christoph too, but it's no small thing to say that we were able to, in the recording, actually our goal was to have the choir sound like they were in the room with the organ. But the organ was recorded in this massive room with the mics kind of everywhere, and y'all were recorded right up on the mic. So just the process of mastering that into a whole.
In 10 different rooms.
In 10 different rooms, right. And Mark gets a lot of credit for that, and it was a fun, Christoph and Patrick and I were in the room with them a lot of the time. We'll talk about that in November too, but thank you for bringing that up, Patrick, because all of the different ways we were very intimate with the piece in ways that we don't normally get to be.
Yes.
And yet we were so isolated. And I'm curious if I was going to jump on the interview, that's why I kept almost interrupting you, and I apologize for that, but you're one of two people now who's conducted this piece. What did it feel like to shift into the conductor seat?
Well, I guess this is true for all new music, right? Is that there's no precedent for how the piece is going to be interpreted, and you know, and to, in some ways, to your credit, you know, like you gave us a lot of space to interpret it ourselves. I'm kind of surprised to hear that how intimate you were with Christoph, because the level of trust that you gave the performers and the soloists and conductors to just say like, okay, well, you know, do your thing. It really emphasized the collaborative nature of doing new work and premiering new work. And I'm sure like any of us can speak on this more, but you know, there's a freedom and a responsibility, right, to saying like, well, this is going on the recording, or this is going to be the first time that this is sort of done, and it might set a precedent, you know, and what is that like? And on the other hand, it's like, well, actually, I kind of want to take this slower than 36. You know, because also, especially when it comes to tempo, I think that so much of how you interpret a piece has to do with the space that you're in. When we're in this big reverberant hall, there's more room to let every, you know, and depending on how Tiffany was feeling in good voice, I asked her right before we did the service, like, so I can go a little longer on this phrase? And she was like, now that you've told me, yes. You know, we had push and pull in that way. And so we can interpret in that live space in here, like to accommodate the situation, you know? But yeah, I would love to hear, I don't know, other people's take on interpreting like your solos and things like that, what it's like to be the first.
As a composer, you can, as you know yourself, you can only put so much on a page when you're writing, and then, but the interpretation can bring so much to a piece. And, you know, like for instance, the first piece, which went out last week with Elizabeth singing the Sanctus, I had never imagined a person singing it like that when I wrote it, but she found something in the piece that was her own and gave it to the piece. And but the idea of the tempo in this piece has to do with, I want the feeling of plain chant to be ever present in the piece, and to the piece to have after all, it is a mass. So the idea of it being contemplative and peaceful, I wanted that to be ever present in the piece. Yeah.
And we've talked about the theme of universality as well. I think it's not just go to sleep music. It's deeply meditative and grounding. The choir was talking the other day when we did the Et Incarnatus Est, and one of our members said that she felt the piece had a lot of conviction. And to me, every time I sang it and continue to, as we're bringing it to life live, it feels like the oak trees, the California oaks that have those roots that go 20, 30, 40 feet down. And it just, each time I sing a line, I feel myself deepening. And that's not an easy thing to accomplish in a 1 hour work. I'm so excited to do it as a full hour because I'm looking forward to feeling that feeling for a solid hour. And just that experience is such a gift.
Well, that's so interesting for you, the leader of the ensemble, the conductor, you know the piece so well. I mean, your role as the conductor was actually to make these click tracks for us, which you had to be very detailed about because that's literally all your tempo guidance is coming through in that moment. You don't get to undo it. And then you spent hours and hours editing each vocal track, but you've actually never conducted the whole work.
That's true.
Which is so interesting.
Yeah, in fact, and Patrick, maybe you can speak to this too, sitting on the other side of this, but when I waved my arms for the first time on the Et Incarnatus Est, and the choir has this big build right after the soloist sings, it was just overwhelming. Just to have this experience as a conductor for 25 years, and then not have it for 18 months, and then come back and get to do that on that work that is so filling. And it was, overwhelming is a word I would use, because my body is remembering in this deep way. Patrick, what was your experience like hearing that?
I was sitting here in the church for that. It was beautiful to experience it. Everything this choir does is beautiful in any case, and it's a joy to listen to Laude sing here on Sunday. It's such a joy.
Thank you.
And I'm honored that they've chosen my work.
Well, it's so special to have you get to be here now too. It's like we've added to the community, and it makes it more special to
you're
perform.
part of it.
Yeah.
Well, I found a home here. I found soulmates, kindred spirits.
Well, I keep trying to get you to sing in the choir. We'll get there one day.
That might take some doing.
But y'all were mentioning coming back live, and in a minute I want to get to the single release today. But the first thing that I did with all of you was to have a small gathering at Patrick's at the end of May. We had finally all gotten vaccinated, and you and Frank invited us over. It was lovely of you, and I even wrote a poem about it after, because it was just such a intense experience to get to sit across the table with all of you like this. We just hadn't done it, like you said. And so in a way, this work, it opened doors for me emotionally coming out of the pandemic, and continues to. And I look forward again to that February concert, because I think we will continue to need new spaces and portals to walk through to unpack some of what we still haven't acknowledged in ourselves. And that gathering at your house that night was really important for me. And I think that speaks to the closeness of this project and the kind of uniqueness of creating in this way.
And one other thought about which is reflecting on the experience of actually physically conducting the piece this last weekend. And this is like sort of technical, but there was something very profound about my experience with it, which is as we were rehearsing it, the tempo is slow, as we've mentioned, and I found myself subdividing, right? Doing this kind of thing too. And then when we actually were doing it in the service, there was something about the swell of energy in it that for the first time I was conducting like this. And like holding every beat in a very specific way that
it looks like the beat was holding you.
Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. I wanted to say something about it because I was really surprised that I could suddenly conduct, like I could embody a tempo and the piece so slowly and like through every single part of it. It was an exciting part to the physical embodiment of it, not just like the vocal embodiment.
That's the magic of this music, Patrick. And I think it answers the question of how do we do this, and how do we face the challenge of, what singers actually struggle with. We have to breathe. We're not a percussionist or a pianist, and yet the music gives us the answer too, and that's kind of cool.
Well, I think my process in how the piece was conceived, which I talked about, but part of it is as well is to try to revive some of that music of the Catholic Church that's kind of gone into decline, in the last maybe 50 years. And with this piece, I'm hoping that I can show that you can still write something that is new, but is part of the tradition of church music. And there's an expression, God works in mysterious ways, and it's incredible that this Catholic Mass found a home in the oldest Protestant cathedral in Los Angeles. And I suppose that's an example of that, I would think.
Yeah, and a cathedral where the parishioners are of all stripes, like, not only Catholic and Protestant, but we have many Buddhists and atheists and Muslims and all stripes of people who want to claim any sort of faith practice show up here and find a home here. And that's wonderful. And even though we're not a Unitarian Universalist church, there is a space for that. And I think that brings us really beautifully into the piece the single that's getting released today, which is the Cum Sancto Spiritum, which is the very end of the Credo text, the I believe text.
Yes.
And it speaks to the universality through the idea of the Spirit and this connection of all people. And I think Christianity, Catholicism, really all religion is in a space right now in the human experience where there's a lot of dark sides being exposed. There's a lot of questions about what it means to be in a faith community, to even have a faith practice of your own. Somehow you were able to continually draw us back to those messages that you've been mentioning of faith, of universality, of tradition seen through a new lens. Yeah. That I think is so important in practices that communities hold, because if we see it through an old lens, it's not us anymore.
Yes.
So you recreated something for us, but specifically in this movement. Christoph says he cries every time he hears it. And
that's because it's got a big organ solo in it.
And in the recording, it's presented beautifully by Gabrielle Thompson, who unfortunately is not singing with us right now, and Tiffany Ho sang it beautifully yesterday when we did it live. You originally wrote it for a tenor solo, and in fact, this is one of the two movements you mentioned. I don't know if you remember, when we first talked about the piece, you talked about this solo and what you wanted from it. And I believe, if I remember, I've been holding on to this, so it may not be accurate, but I've told myself it is, that you somehow connected this solo and Cum Sancto Spiritum to your father more deeply than some of the other movements. Is that something you said or have thought?
I don't remember saying that, but it's quite possible I did. Oddly enough, in this piece, the translation, I believe in the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and the word Catholic comes from the Greek of universal, and I feel this whole community here has a universality about it. And so this piece, in a sense, represents a lot of what the Mass is about, I think, stylistically and in terms of the intention.
Did the meaning change for you hearing it through a soprano voice instead of a tenor?
That was a brilliant idea. David.
Thank you. Yeah, and Fahad said you didn't communicate with the ensemble much. We
I think
communicated a lot.
I think I might change the score now to make it
Yeah,
officially
and you know what?
soprano.
I did that specifically because I heard Gabby's voice on it. The first time I played through it, I thought Gabby would just really nail this. It just sat so beautifully in her voice, and as did Tiffany and Gabby have a lot of similar tools, and so it worked really well in Timothy's voice. I look forward to hearing Tiffany perform it again in February. There's just something about the way you wrote it in sopranos with that particular tool set. It has a color to it that is so warm and inviting. Yeah, I don't know. You were saying something. You can continue.
Yeah, no, I wasn't. No, but,
Okay.
but thank you. I mean, you know, an awful lot of things that happen when, you know, we all compose music, and David, you know, and an awful lot of things that happen through our subconscious, you know, subliminal things. You know, and I think that might have happened in this piece, possibly. Yeah. So I deserve very little credit myself.
You know, I just want to go back to what you were saying about the specificity of the Catholic text here, because, and I preface this by saying I'm not a person who believes that music is a universal language. I don't even know what that would mean. But you know, the text is very specific, right, to like the Catholic tradition, but the sound is not. You know, and yes, like the music is written in the tradition of the Western classical style, but there is something about, is what you were saying about like this is text that's meant to be sung, like the incorporation of this rich sound world on top of the text, it does open it up for me. And I think what you were saying about who this audience is and who this community is, I think one of the reasons why it is such an open, like people are drawn to coming here regardless of their religious traditions, is because of the music. And there's some quality about, I mean, in the social messages and things like that, it's fine. But the music, you know, I think is the big one, because there's something about how it just opens up the world of possibility, the world of interpretation, the world of meaning. It adds like a whole different dimension. I didn't know that the word Catholic meant universal, you know, but the inclusion of music on top of that text lets me know that that's true. Whereas when you just say, I believe in one holy Catholic and apostolic church, I'd be like, well, I don't know if I'm there with you. You know?
Well, that is only one line.
Well, and we were talking about this yesterday, you know, the opening line, I believe in the Holy Spirit, and it just sort of sits there. And that's, for me, that's the spiritual climax of the piece.
Yes, that is true.
And of the Mass. I believe in the Holy Spirit.
Yes, yes. Well, you know, I think the text of the Mass does not come from Scripture. It just evolved. I mean, Christian communities got together to celebrate the Last Supper. And that's, I think, how the Mass started. And the texts that are sung in the sung Latin Mass, some texts came directly from the synagogue, others just grew by tradition. And the Kyrie was, I think, that ended up in the Latin Mass because the Romans hired Greek slaves in Rome, reciting this mantra, Lord have mercy. And so that was incorporated then into the Mass. And the Agnus Dei actually comes from Syria. And, you know, for me, the Agnus Dei and the image it evokes is very much full of Eastern philosophy and spiritualism to me. And so it is kind of, the text itself is kind of universal as well, in a sense, in how it evolved, I think.
Oh, I can't wait to talk more about this in February when we premiere the piece. That's
Well,
exciting.
and to say, we are in a world where now the Mass is heard regularly in concert halls, and where people go to hear the music and what the music does, because some of the most noted Western composers in history have, and not just Western, but certainly Western composers in history, have set this text for myriad reasons and done different things with it. We're going to talk with Michael and Laura next week about that quite a bit. But to say that here on the front end of something brand new, and you've mentioned being, I think, the first Irish composer to have set the Latin Mass in this way, in a full-length major work. You know, the world might ask, why do we need to do that again? And yet you've shown us. You've given us music that is so important to today because of what it says to us as people today. And even though we're a world that's fast evolving away from ourselves, we need tradition to hold on to in some way to make sense of things. So you've kind of given us a buoy in two different parts of who we are, where we're going and where we've come from. I'm going to give a few credits as we wind down, but the last thing I'll have y'all all do is respond to this idea of, we've just brought a new major work into the world, one that I believe will become widely performed in short time. How does that feel? Meditate with that, and I'll just say that it's been so nice to be here today with all of you, and that we will do this again, this live conversation with the composer, a week from now with Reverend Laude and Reverend Michael, where we'll talk about more of these spiritual questions of how the work came to be and what it means for this community. And then a week later, we'll talk with Christoph Bull and with Patrick about creating the work from the inside and with the organ and all. And that day, on November 8th, we will release the album. If you want to get it a day early, you can come to the service on November 7th, where we will have a full music service where we'll perform many of the movements from the Mass. We'll also be celebrating All Saints' Day, and it'll be a commemorative service, so we're asking people to bring memorabilia of people they've lost in the quarantine during the pandemic. And so it should be a very emotional day, and you can get your CD a day early. And then also, the single is out today. You can find out more about this work at fccla.org/the-mass-album. And we do hope to see you involved as we release it and as the piece continues to take shape into 2022. So in closing, thoughts on, we just brought a new big thing into the world. What does it feel like? What are you looking forward to?
I'm just excited to, this work feels like a way to connect with the greater community across the country and maybe across the world of music lovers and sacred music lovers.
Nice.
I think it's hard to, it pairs actually a lot with kind of feelings of what it was like to be in quarantine in the pandemic. It's hard to sum it up in one feeling or word because it lasted so long. And the way, like we've said, the way we recorded this piece was over a long period of time, and it's still kind of ongoing. So I think to unpack, what we all felt in the last 2 years and the different projects we were a part of, I think we're gonna have, it took a long time, and we're gonna have to take a long time to kind of keep unpacking. So I think, moments like this and trying to share it and seeing how it impacts other people, and kind of continuing to close that loop as we get towards the live performance in February, and just how our reflections evolve as this process just keeps evolving.
This is a piece that has such a specific context for me in the way that we recorded it and brought it to life originally, that I'm most excited about expanding that context by re-engaging with these pieces live in a reciprocal way, surrounded by the voices of my friends and my spiritual community, and then having a culminating performance of it in February. I'm just really excited for that kind of bubble to expand outside of what was my closet and is now once again the world.
Step out of the closet. I think my experience is based around this question of, does the world need another Mass? And I sort of don't care if the world needed another Mass. I think this piece, I needed this piece, maybe we did. I think certainly Patrick needed this piece, and I think that that's enough. And so I think I'm grateful, is my experience of it.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that my collaborators here at First Church brought something new to the piece, something extra that I didn't even realize was there. And this new recording that's going to be released in 2 weeks' time, I hope that people find it contemplative and peaceful, and that's all people of any faith and people of no faith.
Thank you. Yeah, and I should say too, I left out of the credits roll there that Fahed has helped us create a new concert series that it will happen here at the church, and that the February performance will be a part of. It'll be the second concert of, and that series is called the Golden Thread Concert Series. Do you want to give us the quick spiel on that?
The series is about expanding the ritual inherent in the concert experience so that we can engage with the performance and listening of music as a direct spiritual practice. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to have this piece so early in this new concert series to help establish what it is, because it's going to be participatory. It's not just going to be show up and come and listen to some music. This series is inherently participatory, the way that the audience and performers interact. But this piece in particular, where we're inviting anybody and everybody from the Los Angeles community to stand on the chancel and be part of the premiere performance, really is, it embodies, I think, that central goal of overlapping musical and spiritual practice. So that's the series as a whole, and that's going to be this concert specifically.
And that will be every first Saturday in 2022.
From now until forever.
From now until forever, so put that on your calendar. You all, thank you. I think I told you once a week, probably more than you ever wanted to hear, but your presence carried me through quarantine, continues to inspire me. And I get emotional every time I think about what we put together and continue to do. This place, the people we create with, the Cathedral Choir, Laude, are incredibly special and unique. And it's a joy to be here on the stage. Patrick, your presence in our community has been such a joy, and this piece is going to continue to live in a special place in my heart. And I think everyone, I'm so excited to share it with the larger world, and thank you for being here to help us get a little closer to it through your experience.
Thank all of you.
And with that, we'll say goodbye, and we'll see you next Monday. Please do share the Cum Sancto Spiritu. Let's get it out there in the world and get some buzz going.
Second number one. That's what
Second
we want.
number one.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Bye.